Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for news stories from Yellowcat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Today we have new amazing stories, so subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. Let's get started. What's the most effective method you've gotten back at a jerk boss or coworker? I'll get started. I worked in the information technology section of a large law firm. A guy I was kind of acquainted with who worked a couple desks down from me had a nasty attitude and got into a protracted battle with a tech support manager who was, frankly, a stupid cow. He was fired as a result of the feud and, I believe, his general attitude. He called to inform me about it the night it happened. I was working on a project after hours at the time. My manager summons the department to a meeting the next day to inform us that my pseudo-friend had resigned, but that because he worked in IT and had access to all passwords, they were not authorized to give him 2 weeks' notice. Of course, this was total nonsense. Everyone knew he was dismissed, and everyone knew our boss was telling the truth through his teeth. So let's fast forward about 6 months. I'd just been scapegoat for something I wasn't even remotely guilty for, and I could see the writing on the wall that they were putting together a case to get me fired. It just so happened that I got a job offer from a friend who worked at another company. So when the offer for around $6,000 more came in, I did a little dance and then shut the H up. My partner was a flight attendant at the time, so we planned a little trip between jobs. I got into work the day before we were supposed to leave for Europe, did my best to finish off all my issues, put out whatever fires I could for the sake of my teammates, and then marched in and handed my supervisor my letter of resignation, effective immediately. He read the letter, had a long pause, and then asked me when I wanted to go. I paused for a moment, savoring the trap, and reminded him that because I had access to all the sensitive system passwords, I wasn't allowed to give/take 2 weeks' notice. His jaw dropped to the floor, he stammered some phrase fragments, and it was evident I had caught him in a lie. The greatest thing was that a few weeks later, while we were living it up in Italy, I checked in on my bank account at an internet cafe and saw that my direct deposit had cleared a check for the pay period for 2 weeks after I left. So even though I didn't work it, I was paid for the 2 weeks' notice. That extra compensation practically covered the cost of an extra week in Europe. And by far, the finest aspect of the vacation was the extra week. I was a developer for a firm that produced EDI software in the past. My supervisor was a micromanaging, penny-pinching, anxious W-knob. For instance, I know your contract says you can take an hour for lunch, but most people just take 15 minutes, and I think you should too. Therefore, I don't see any reason why you should not make a habit of coming in 30 minutes early and leaving 30 minutes later. My primary grievance with him stems from his denial of my request for a leave of absence so that I could be with my wife during her mother's final days. The building, owned by my boss's brother, was a renovated factory divided into multiple parts where our office was located. There was a creche, a karate studio, and us all inside one building. I had observed that there were never any lights on the fire alarm panel located at the building's main entrance. It appeared as though no power was entering it. I then dialed the fire department. 30 minutes later, a surprise inspection was conducted because the building included a creche. The building owner received a violation and a fine of 10,000 euros. I had hoped for a larger amount, in addition to having to pay a ridiculous amount of money to have a new fire alarm system installed. When I was let go under dubious circumstances a few months later, I informed my supervisor, who then phoned the fire department. It was a beautiful sensation to see the color fade from his face. I subsequently filed a lawsuit for unjust dismissal against him, and the Employment Appeals Tribunal would consider my case in a few weeks. I've relished getting back at him for treating me so D-ish. Edit. I forgot to mention how lovely it was to see the inspection. 2 young women who appeared more like salespeople than fire safety inspectors were dispatched by the fire department. They asked to meet with the building management when they arrived at our office. With a broad smile akin to Terry Thomas, my boss emerged from his room to welcome them. "Hi, I manage the building for my brother." Great, we're from the Dublin Fire Brigade and we're here to have a look at your fire safety systems. His jaw dropped. When I was 17, I was a laborer on a construction job. Basically, all I had to do was sweep the floors and maintain the site tidy while the carpenters and builders worked. Tony was one of the idiots who worked there. Tony was an elderly, overweight Croatian who had spent the last few decades living in Australia but had never taken to the local customs. Being a carpenter, he would march around like King D, giving commands to everyone, including the foremen and builders who weren't in the same trade as him. Furthermore, he would perpetually go around with a smoking joint protruding from his mouth. Although I'm an addict myself, I wasn't bothered by smoking at work because no one had the courage to tell him to stop. Anyway, I avoided Tony as much as possible when I first met him since I could tell he was a jerk. However, he would yell in my ear, "You want to smoke?" and grab me by the shoulders so forcibly every time I passed him. He would do this once or twice a day. I used to just gently decline, move away, and try to avoid him, but this crap kept happening. I started telling him to F off and stop touching me after a month, but he persisted. Instead of offering me illegal substances, he started yelling, "Don't touch me! Don't touch me!" in a mocking tone. I had to take matters into my own hands because the foreman wasn't taking it seriously and the situation had gotten out of hand. I took Tony's phone from his workstation, picked out a few messages, and sent them to his wife after one of the other employees told me how concerned Tony was that his wife could find out he was having an affair. In addition, he had some wooden strips with measurements printed on them. I suppose this served as a pattern. "Don't touch me" was inscribed by him on them. I grabbed about 5 of these timber strips, added the word "me" to the end, and superglued the effers to his car. I also superglued the caps back on after letting his tires down while I was there. It'll work, I supposed. I avoided seeing his response because I was able to leave that day before he could find out about my antics. Unsurprisingly, the foreman phoned me that afternoon and told me to find another job. I may have lost my job, but it was worth it just to take that a-hole down a few pegs. In a remote workplace, I worked as an installer. I traveled extensively for work, frequently spending weekends on site. This was fine under my previous supervisor, who allowed me a lot of latitude by allowing me to work from home, giving me comp time, and so on. I had a new boss after 4 years. In addition, the corporation laid off everyone in my office, which numbered over 100 individuals. My new boss asked that I come in nonetheless, a 45-minute drive away, to sit in an empty office. However, I still had to travel from Sunday to Friday with no overtime or comp time. When I protested to HR, the HR manager informed me that because I'm salaried, if they wanted me to work 80 hours a week, I'd work 80 hours and I shouldn't expect any pay. Everyone I spoke with seemed to believe this. Overtime is given to salaried employees. This made no sense to me. I called the local state labor office and explained what I'd done and what I'd been told. They urged me to get a lawyer because if they didn't, they'd have to pay the state 50 cents for every dollar they owed me. That's exactly what I did. I settled out of court, got a new job, got a severance, and forced my boss to do an exit interview in which I told her that if she'd been halfway considerate and legally compliant, she wouldn't have to scramble to cover the next 8 scheduled installs by flying people out from the East Coast and paying them overtime. So yeah, I sued them for 5 years of overtime pay. I was paid $40,000, received a severance package, a letter of recommendation, and told my boss off. What is your terrible HOA tale? The grass in the common area behind my condo had a lot of brown spots, so I had to pay for some grass seed and topper, and I also put up a temporary low-hanging 18-inch plastic fence to keep the rabbits and large mowing machines away from the area. This is because the freshly seeded area needs to be left alone for 2 months in order for the grass to take root. Suddenly, 2 women who identified themselves as board members, one of whom was the chair of the landscaping committee, rose to the scene. They told me that even though any idiot could see what I was trying to do, I had to take down my fencing material. When they reminded me that the CC&Rs forbid any fencing in the common areas, I told them I would get my chair and wait by the mailbox for the board to send me a $50 violation for trying to grow grass and protect it. I wasn't in the mood to talk to any communists that day and told them to get a real job. I was never fined, but I did get some angry glances from those two ladies when I told them to scram. My fencing managed to keep the gardeners with their pushy, unclean mowers off my small slice of heaven long enough for the grass to recover completely. The road ran along the top of a hill. We had a steep driveway to a flattish half-acre, most of which was surrounded by a 7-foot fence. The fence did a great job of keeping our dogs in, but because of the elevation difference, you could see basically our whole yard from the road. Got a boat and stored it in our side yard. 3 days later, we get a letter threatening to sell our house out from under us because they could see our boat from the road and it was lowering everybody's property values. Never mind the fact that multiple board members had RVs taller than their fences, or that our neighbor had 6 ratty old Camrys in his driveway and yard, and that we were able to talk down our purchase price because of them. Ended up going to arbitration over it. Took 6 months, but in the end, we got to keep our boat. Seriously, FHOAs, never going to live in a neighborhood that has one again. 2 stories. My spouse and I own a condo. We were notified that in order for our lot to be paved, we would need to park our cars outside of it on the street for approximately a week. One evening, my wife is preparing supper and I am ready to play video games when there's a knock on the door. Our car was struck by a blow. My wife was parked behind me, which made things worse. Thus, we were unaware of the victim. As we descended, my car got slammed in the front wheel on the driver's side. It hit me so hard, I was propelled back into my wife's car and up on the curb about a foot. She had to acquire a new hood, grill, bumper, and light because mine was totaled. I had a $350 tune-up done on it approximately 4 days ago, and I never received my money back. However, someone reported it while their dog was out for a walk. He was operating a work truck, a Ford Expedition. He went to jail. Quick film some months later. My brand new 2016 Ford Focus SE is here. My very first new vehicle. I'm extremely happy. One morning, as I got up to go to work, I noticed that my car was parked on the side of the lot I seldom use. When asked, the wife denied moving it. It felt strange to me. A few days later, I saw some serious scratches on the black plastic portion beneath my bumper when I checked my car. Then I learned that a steamroller was left on the repaved lot, sinking some of the pavement, and the HOA had to replace that portion. They simply grabbed a tow truck one morning and moved every car in the lot that needed to be moved. We never got a call, email, knock on the door, or anything. At home, they simply moved it on their own. I gave my car a closer look and saw that the black plastic sections on the front and rear had more scratches. When it came down to it, the HOA paid for the replacement parts and labor. My community's fiber optic broadband connection is excruciatingly sluggish. I discovered a business that would be willing to install 1 gig fiber to every apartment for a flat cost of £5,000 total, not each, provided that we could locate 20 residences that would sign up for their package. The fee would be for the entire project, not each individual unit. I found 80 homeowners who were interested in purchasing it. I was also able to find studies online that showed an increase in the speed of internet from 8 MPBs to 1,000 MPBs would have a considerable impact, equivalent to an increase of £10,000 for each home on the housing market. HOA said that we have a lot of retired people here who are confused by it, therefore they decided against approving it. They then attempted to implement parking rules throughout the entire neighborhood, which was in direct violation of the freehold as well as the lease, and they began attempting to charge people £100 for having visitors over after 7 o'clock or for failing to present a parking permit. Again, the permits were in direct violation of the lease. When they tried to fine me, I addressed a letter to the other 200 owners stating that I'm a barrister, highlighting the terms in the lease and outlining how the management business had overstepped the bounds of the lease. They eventually dropped the charge against me. The company made an attempt to sue me for the sum of £100 under some parking contract that they felt they had created as a result of putting up some signage in the parking lot. They did not win. After that, I summoned an annual general meeting, as all leaseholders are also shareholders in the freehold of the property and consequently the management company, and demanded a board resignation or board elections, which were required by the Article of Organization but hadn't been held in a decade. I also demanded that the board members be paid their full salaries. Following the removal of all 3 directors, we appointed a few accountants and professional property managers who reside on the estate to take over as the new directors of the company. The director of the board was so upset that she couldn't hold back her emotions. She's a 70-year-old woman who has spent her entire life on the estate, which was created by her father. She was born and raised there. Even though it meant everything to her, she had no idea what was going on. We now have broadband speeds of 1 gigabit. Guys, thank you for all the support and likes. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. See you next time.